You're listening to What's Contemporary Now, a show about culture and the people, places, and things that together make it up.
At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Because at Blinds.com, the only thing we treat better than windows is you. Visit Blinds.com now for up to 45% off with minimum purchase plus a professional measure at no cost. Rules and restrictions apply.
Despite receiving a fail from the late and legendary Louise Wilson at Central St. Martin's, he was still able to show his collection at the degree exhibition and ended up being the first one in his class to get a job, at Tom Ford no less. With time spent at Balenciaga Couture and being an existing fan of the brand, Nicholas Aburn's arrival as the new creative director of Area feels like a most suitable match. Always a fan of other introverts in fashion, I did enjoy the way he describes his quote-unquote failure as a delayed education, having realized later that managing one's creative and emotional state is a key to longevity of any kind.
This is Nicholas Aburn, and we're talking about what's contemporary now.
Nicholas, we are so happy to have you join us today. And as always, we like to go back to the beginning. So in your case, let's start before Central St. Martin's and working at Prada and Bond Street and talk about those early moments watching fashion television with your mom.
Yeah, my mom really loved fashion, and Sunday mornings were sort of the one time in the week where my yuppie parents weren't super busy. There was this really reverent attitude about watching Elsa clench. My mom took it really seriously, and I think I inherently mimicked that. It was a really nice time. I think that I was a serious kid. I think that I was romantic, and I connected more to art and beautiful things than I did to normal being a kid. And I think that the fashion world that Elsa Clench presented really spoke to that. I thought these are people who are really serious about what they're doing, and it really made me want to be part of it.
And despite that shared interest in fashion with your mother, there was a period where, come time to apply to universities, they weren't entirely supportive of you pursuing fashion, right?
My mom had enough understanding to know that it was an intense and competitive industry, and she wanted to protect me by putting me in a more traditional career path. I think from a creative perspective, she loved the idea of it, but she did not want me to pursue it, or at least she was like, you could do it later. And I was like, no, I'm doing it now.
What were they hoping you would do instead?
You know what? I don't even remember, because I think that they acknowledged that I would want to do something creative. I think I was applying to like art history programs. I don't know what I would have done with that.
You did mention that you were luckily not accepted to the Ivy League schools they pushed you to apply to, but you were accepted to Central St. Martin's. So let's jump across the pond and kind of start there, because you were expected to support yourself, right? This wasn't some free meal ticket.
Yeah, I think that it was the financial crisis, and it sort of started out like, of course, we'll pay for you, but then it was a really hard time. I think it's not as though my parents never gave me any money when I was at college, but I was working full time and making £40,000 a year the whole time I went to college. So the burden was on me. And that was a really important and I think interesting element of my education, unique maybe to my peers, in that I was having my nightclubby, fashiony St. Martin's experience and pushing the boundaries and wanting to be really creative. But I was also really limited by the structure of getting up and not being hungover in the morning, or if I was hungover, feeling really the punishment for it. And in terms of then at work, I would try and push people to buy the runway clothes because I was all excited and giddy about fashion. And a lot of the time they didn't want to, and that was an education. A lot of the time I could get people to try it on and they'd come out and they'd be like, I look ridiculous. And then they put on like amazing pants and a cashmere sweater and look so good. And I really internalized that that's a beautiful thing. And that as much as I love creativity and I was sort of really turned on by obviously Prada's creative genius, but that actually these just gorgeous normal clothes that they sell were maybe bringing even more joy to the customer in the end.
Well, you made a comment in a previous interview about the way having that job differentiated you from your peers and turned you into an observer. And I wanted to know what that meant.
Well, first of all, I think it made me very serious. I'm already prone to seriousness. And I would literally have to run across Soho from Bond Street to Tottenham Court Road in my Prada uniform to go to crits. I think that there was this physical differentiation between me and my uniform and then the rest of the St. Martin's lot. And I did feel outside of everything in that way. So I felt like an observer maybe in that sense. But I also think that I had this sense of being between two worlds. Because then, of course, at Prada, I was like the wacky kid that they hired for some reason. So I think I felt like an observer of the Prada world and this kind of very rigid, formal part of the industry. On the other hand, observer of the most young, fun, and inspirational part of fashion.
And how is one prone to seriousness?
I don't know. I think I was born with it. Since I was a little kid, I took everything very seriously and was concerned about the state of the world, even when the world was less concerning. I think everything is really interesting and beautiful, and I worried about not taking care of it, not living up to it.
At the risk of being cliche, what's your sign?
Cancer.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. People, I will say, I'm not that good with star signs, but people often say to me, wow, you are the most Cancer I've ever met.
A bit of a jump, but failure is arguably an underrated teacher. And I wanted to explore what you learned from it while studying under the late and legendary Louise Wilson at Central St. Martin's.
Such an interesting one. It was like an education delayed response time bomb. I feel like it took me a while. I was so disturbed working with her. She notoriously had a really high pressure approach, pressure cooker. And I was, I think, especially susceptible to it. Short answer is that I shat the bed with her. I got so stressed and I really did spin out. But a lot of great things came of it immediately and long term. I think that immediately what happened is that at some point I hit such a rock bottom that I was like, I have to separate myself. And I think that was a learning. I think sometimes in life you do have to make a rash choice. I just stopped seeing her at some point, stopped going to my appointments, which was allowed. Of course, I think it led to the fact that I failed. But at some point I said, I'm spending my time, and importantly, you are spending your money when you develop your collection, your master's collection. So if I'm going to spend this time and this money, at this point, I've got to use it to make what I actually believe in. That collection, of course, then did get me my first job at Tom Ford. So I think immediately we could say that was a learning and that was worth it. But I do think that long term, what popped up, and I honestly have been thinking a lot about in the past 6 months since I started the job, is that you do have to sort of manage yourself. I think managing yourself is the first step to managing the creative process for your whole team. And for sure, I felt nervous and intimidated in the past couple months. And I think that I'm just that much older now that I could look back on that experience and say, you got to cool the voices in your head and cool it down so that you can kind of let the joy and the love and what you actually care about come through.
You're describing such a relevant experience when it comes to just the general journey of being alive, but also specifically being a creative. So how do you go about managing yourself and quieting those voices and getting on track and staying there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I'm also very disciplined. I learned that in that kind of intense Prada St. Martin's time. And you do sometimes just have to stay up late to get the work done. But there is a certain feeling, and I think I learned that feeling with Louise, where you're like, this is too far. I'm crashing up and I've got to meditate. I've got to put on some of that like brown noise YouTube videos that chill me out. This weekend, I went to London to just chill and be in a place that I feel like myself. There's a limit where it all becomes indulgent, but I do think that you have to know how to get back to your best self. With my therapist, I'm always saying, follow the breadcrumb trail back to me. And I get worried. I think that during the Louise time, I lost the breadcrumb trail and it took a long time to find it again. now that I feel like I have it again, I'm very conscientious, not just for my mental health, but for the best that I can do for my career and for area. It's also my job to know how to be my best self.
Don't you feel like that's something that inevitably is demanded kind of time and time again throughout life? No matter how many times you return to that self, you have to then rediscover it when it disappears because it's just a part of the cyclical journey of growth?
Yeah, definitely. And presumably every time that you get away from it is probably a growth experience. So that's interesting. I'll have to chew on if I should also be letting myself lose track every once in a while.
I certainly think it happens on its own. I wouldn't personally rush to be lost, but I do find, and I'm curious if you agree, that any sort of period of struggle or challenge is always kind of the precursor to something incredibly fulfilling or joyful, or in your words, growth. It never seems wasted. Once that challenge is over, it always feels like it served some type of a purpose, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. I think that since the show a couple of weeks ago, I definitely felt such an exciting time, so much pride, so many good feelings, but also such a wave of self-interrogation. And then, of course, like self-criticism. And I think that's why I was thinking about Louise a lot recently, is that it feels like a little bit of an upheaval internally. So now that I'm starting the next collection, that's the thing that's been encouraging, is it does feel like an inspiration and a call to arms to move forward and to find new things and to make myself better and to make the work better.
So speaking of her, she failed you. You were still permitted to show in the final exhibition. You then were the first in your class to land a job at Tom Ford, no less, obviously starting from the get in the upper echelons of the industry, which must have been mind-blowing. What was that experience like in the early days?
Yeah, I was shocked and elated. I do think that it was a result of making the work that I believed in. And so I think that there was a rushing in of confidence because of that more than anything. Working there was very intense. The team that he hired was a lot of people who'd been a queen and had this kind of military sense of discipline. After the insanity of working with Louise Wilson, that was a new intensity, but I think a really good thing. Took me out of myself and said, this is this self-indulgent time where you're feeling so bad about yourself and so bad about this interaction with Louise is over. And now is just a time when you're just going to make work. I think also Tom Ford, I mean, so much creativity happened, but also Tom loved real clothes, quality clothes, perfectly made things, a lot of very simple things that as a young designer, you're like, oh, we're not putting a drape on this. No, you're just making a gorgeous suit. And I think that was really good for me in that moment to learn a discipline about design, learn a discipline about my workflow and my work schedule and what it is to really commit yourself to the job.
Well, a more recent example of you working under the banner of another brand was your time spent at Balenciaga Couture, which to me feels closer to your work at Area, obviously, than an era of time spent at Tom Ford. But what do you feel like you've brought into the new role from that one?
I feel like there's a lot because I think I'm very influenced by Demna. I think he's a huge inspiration, an amazing designer. I think he's really great at reducing big concepts down to their most elemental form. I saw him take ideas that I was thinking about and reduce them down. I saw how he would propose an idea, I would work on it, and then I think he might be interested in what I'd worked on, but he would also say, actually, I was thinking about it more like this. And when I saw how he was thinking of it, it's, oh yeah, that's so pure, that communicates so well. So I think that's something that I had a lot in mind working on my own collection. I also think that a big thing with him is that he works with archetypes, and that's something that I really like. It's something I liked even before I worked with him, but that I certainly learned to love more and honed working with him. And I think that a big thing there is authenticity. Demna's really a great fashion nerd of like denim wash and leather treatment, and not just a kind of reference to mall goss, but the most obscure, coolest kids in Finland. And I think it's not just for bragging rights, but it's really, it makes it pure and better. And it makes the whole message land better when it's the most authentic version of itself.
Having worked under such brilliant minds such as him and Tom, obviously that role is going to differ than the one you're in today, where you've become a creative director of a brand yourself, albeit one where you're still needing to consider the brand's existing codes and DNA. But how does this role differ from the one you played under the leadership of those two?
The thing that I've been thinking about the most since I started this role is how much you're kind of a leader of the team, an emotional leader who's got to not just creatively say what we're doing, but stimulate and inspire and keep the vibe up and say, yes, this is good. It's not that it's not good, but it's still not right. I thought we need to go right and we need to go left. And it's only after seeing it. And I've been on the other side. I know that's exhausting. So I feel the responsibility to do that work. And I've been laughing a lot thinking about all my bosses thinking, damn, I did not appreciate how much effort this takes. But I think really meaningful work to do, because it takes a team, it takes a village to get a collection made, and you need all those people to be excited. And it's a great feeling when everyone's excited, but also the work is so much better when everyone's excited.
Of course. And are you working with the team you inherited, or have you brought in a lot of your own people for this new beginning?
Yeah, it's a mostly inherited team. It's something that I felt really strongly about. I've thought a lot about the decision afterwards, but having finished the show, I'm really glad that I did keep the team. I think that it's harder to shift people's language than burn everything down and build a new language. And I think watching the big guys who I look up to, evidently the smartest technique is to fire everyone and start fresh. That's what people do. But I don't know. I liked having been inside teams and having seen how rough that looks and a bunch of people get fired. I just thought it was an interesting challenge to say, we're going to turn this shit from the inside.
When I think of creative directors, especially in the context of brands, I think about them as these sort of unique filters through which they distill information, what inspires them, into these brand worlds and these collections. But how would you describe your own filter?
I like everything to be very immediate.
Mm-hmm.
I think about things almost like in terms of the pop art movement. I think that there's something really noble about how clearly and easily you can communicate an idea, like an economy of words, an economy of references. I think there's something humanistic about that. I hope that the work has enough layers, enough quality to be dissected past the first message. But I like things that can be consumed and appreciated by anyone, and that you feel the joy immediately.
You were also a fan of Area as a brand before you even joined, right? So what first caught your eye?
I do think I saw it before fall 2019, but I think it was the fall 2019 collection that had this braided chain fringe or crystal fringe that really caught my eye. I think I was like, that is not like the other New York collections. It's a little bit more, it's working with a pop mentality, and it's really graphic. It has a theatricality that doesn't feel like how a lot of designers in New York work. And so I think it stood out to me because of that.
It's so true. I've often been curious as to why Area chooses to stay on the New York calendar, just because, to your point, it does stand out as far as its style of creativity and its visual language in comparison to a lot of what we see here. But if you look through past collections or your own debut, the question of statements versus wearability can sometimes come up. I think you definitely have both woven through, but when approaching this first collection as the new creative director, how important was something like wearability for you versus making those statement pieces?
It's very important. I do think that in this collection, in Area, there's two components. There's the product and there's the fantasy. And there's a certain amount of crossover, but I personally thought of them a bit separately.
Mm-hmm.
I think that these really show-stopping elements are not just for Instagram. I think of it more like you have the Ralph Lauren store all lined in wood paneling. And when you wear a polo shirt, you're wearing the wood paneling. You're wearing that feeling of being in a Ralph Lauren store. And so I think that I wanted to uphold the legacy of Area being this really exciting and show-stopping brand that when you wear the cute little dresses, you're wearing more than the dress. I think with that said, the real clothes, I wanted them to be super, super wearable. I learned a lot from Tom. I was very influenced by his attitude towards not just that you want to like it to sit well, but that practicality is part of chic. And that if a dress has too many things hanging off of it and they're getting caught in a chair as she's walking through a party, or every time she sits down, she has to lift up the drape of the skirt, eventually it detracts from the chicness, even if it's really chic when she's just standing there. So I think about that kind of thing a lot because I want people to feel good. Again, I think it's humanistic to say, I deserve to feel hot tonight. I deserve to look my best. I deserve to have fun. I deserve to look cool and like I'm in the know.
Well said. So who is the Area girl, and will she look different under your new leadership?
I think that the Area girl is looking for fun, whether it's that she's like going out for a fun party or whether she's going to an art opening and she's the craziest, most fun girl who knows everyone there, or she's just that girl at work who's like having more fun at lunch than everyone else. So I think fun is really important. I think that curiosity, wanting to evolve the look, wanting to try new things, wanting to be able to wear it different ways. Will it look different? I don't know. I think that I'm still evolving it. I would like it to look similar. Maybe it's more grown up now. There's still humor and playfulness in the work that I'm doing, but I think that it's maybe a bit more subtle. It's like a smirk, not a laugh.
And you've been spending a lot of time in Milan since having joined Area. Is that something that you plan to sustain? And if so, how do you think it informs your design process, taking that distance from New York and the States?
I think that having distance is not a bad thing. I love Milan a lot. I actually need to spend more time in New York. I think that when I am there, it's so inspiring, and I literally just sneaky snap photos on the street all the time. And quite a few of those things ended up in the show. While I was in the transition, it was a lot of work to get our suppliers and the factories and our team under control. And so in the first couple months, it was necessary to be highly based in Milan, but I think it's super important. I don't want it to be superficial, the connection to New York. It was started there, and I mean to make it meaningfully stay a part of New York. What I like about Milan is that it's very quiet and discreet, and it serves as this kind of counterpoint to the chaos of New York and the chaos of, frankly, our culture.
You did say during the pandemic that you're a total homebody and that you could actually work from home forever, never having to see anyone else. Is that something you still feel resonates?
I actually forgot that I said that. I am very introverted. I think that I'm still the kid who was very shy and felt very detached in many ways. I genuinely get a lot of inspiration from being alone. I feel like that's part of my survival kit for how I get back to my creative self. But the world is way too interesting to miss just because I want to be at home alone all the time. One of my mantras that I really sustain myself with is this idea that you've got one ticket to the show. This crazy world is definitely a show not to miss.
You're talking about the benefits of time spent alone and how that can be a moment of recharge, and cognitive overload is certainly pervasive in today's culture, regardless of whether or not you're extroverted or introverted. But when it comes to deciding what it is that deserves your attention or what gets discarded, the signal versus the noise of it all, how is it that you filter your day-to-day?
Therapy. I meditate a lot. I think that on a kind of day-to-day practical level, I've tried to take this kind of Marie Kondo, does it spark joy approach and be a bit more simplistic about, oh my God, I'm looking at this profile again, and every time I look, I feel jealous, or I feel like I'm not doing enough, or that I'm like in the wrong place at the wrong time. Unfollow. Because it's just, everybody has a lot of responsibility and seriousness in their life. And it's not as though I'm not engaging with the serious aspects of my life. I don't need to also take on the work of engaging with self-criticism that's not even serving anything.
Are you an avid user of things like social media?
Less and less, but for sure I have been the most avid, and I still access a lot of inspiration through Instagram, more and more TikTok. I don't enjoy TikTok, but it is such a window into our culture. So it's almost like homework looking at TikTok.
Well, that is something that, speaking of Tom Ford earlier, he's mentioned that always really stuck with me, which was this idea that we all have a window of time in which we are the culture, and that sort of organic osmosis is occurring. And as things kind of shift, there are moments where we move out of that window. And that's by no means to say that happens as young as in your 30s, but as someone who's tasked with the responsibility of generating creative vision that feels inspired by and somehow in touch or relevant to the culture, how is it that you go about sustaining that curiosity or that vision? Because you did mention things like pop art and particular references that are personal to you, but what is it that you take from contemporary culture when it comes to inspiration?
That's a big question. What I really am inspired by is people are just who are loose and free. I think that I am not built that way. I never have been. It's one good thing about TikTok because I love seeing people who just put their whole lives out there. It's like the early days of reality TV. I wish I could give myself to the world that way, but I can't. And I'm not actually looking at it in a sardonic way. I think that there's something so beautiful about seeing youth culture just expressing itself with freedom. That in itself is inspiration for area. My challenge to myself is to bring more and more of that wildness to area every season.
Optimism. You've talked about things that spark joy and being an avid editor of your own life in terms of what causes you to feel well versus what causes you to be distracted or take you out of the mindset that you want to be in. But when you look at something like optimism, do you feel like that's a superpower, or do you feel like it's a toxic trait, in the whole trend of toxic positivity?
I get the toxic positivity thing, but no, I'm firmly on the side of superpower. I think that it's a superpower because it's hard to manifest, and I certainly don't have the superpower of constant optimism. But the world keeps going. I think that the worst things that have ever happened to this world, not just in the past 100 years, but in the thousands of years before that, the worst things that ever happened, the world kept going. When I have intrusive thoughts, I remind myself that. And being part of something interesting, being part of like the great human story is trying to do something with the deck of cards you got.
Absolutely. And optimism, according to studies, has been shown to be more conducive to creativity and better ideation and seeing possibility and all of those wonderful things. So how do you go about cultivating more of it in your daily life?
At St. Martin's, I really, really regret that I'm not a good student, that I didn't take notes and keep them and know exactly what it was. But I once read this thing in the very little bit of academic cultural studies you have to do at St. Martin. I think it was Plato or something. It's like a Greek scholar that was saying that creativity is like a faucet, and that if you turn it off or if you leave it off for too long, that it gets rusty and it won't open again. And so I think that speaks to that idea of optimism and creativity, that the more that you access it, the more that you say, today's a good day for a new idea, today's a good day to try something new, today's a good day to ask questions, I'm trying to calm my mind and encourage myself and encourage the people I'm working with to be in a good enough mood to feel that they don't have too much stress on them, even if it is stressful, but they can ask the questions and try the things like create creativity.
What about the flip side of that? Something like fear. Do you think it's a good motivator or just a wasteful use of energy?
I'm certainly motivated by fear, which is something I talk about a lot with myself. And who knows, maybe long term, I could move away from that. But what I would say about fear is that, and I think I said this before in a different way, but I just really appreciate the life that I have and the opportunities that I have. And it's not fear, paralyzing fear out of worrying about everything that could happen in the world, but I do take my privileges seriously. And I think a healthy amount of fear, a healthy amount of respecting your reality is a good kick in the ass to do good things.
Motivator for the win. And what about something like AI? Exciting or frightening?
I think it is frightening, but I think that it's one of those inevitable things that you've clearly just gotta get with the program. So I'm trying to use it. I'm also trying to limit it. I limit my engagement with it, if only to keep the saw sharp. I think, like everyone else, I was using ChatGPT a lot for a while, and I'd really been trying to interrogate the kind of thinking that I need to put to ChatGPT. I think I use AI drawing tools because I think of them more as just using Photoshop. But the reality of AI drawing tools is they don't come up with ideas. It's actually very hard to get a new idea out of an AI drawing tool because it's only rehashing images that are already out there. It's scary, but the future is scary.
It's a little bit of an offshoot of things like optimism, but do you feel like that's a choice or a byproduct?
I think that the first step to being happy is to choose to be happy, but there's a lot of life that follows. And I think that sometimes you're further away from happiness, and that's okay. I think that I have learned not to try to control happiness too much. I try to reconnect in moments to my happiness, but not to control it for long periods or to obsess for days or weeks on end if I'm not feeling super close to my happiness. Because then other times you're just so connected to it, and that's the kind of ride of being a living being.
Yeah, you need both in order for either to have any meaning, right?
Yeah.
How would you define what freedom looks like today?
Wow. It's a loaded question. I think that freedom is, we're so free and we're so not free. It's funny because I think what comes to mind, I don't know how to answer your question, but what comes to mind is that I never think about freedom. I think that I've had the incredible privilege to grow up in a time when, for example, being gay, that my sexuality was never challenged, at least not since I was a kid, like a real child. And that I really get to live that aspect of my life with such fluidity. But I also feel really bound by, but I feel the responsibility to be a member of society, and I feel part of a society. I don't know. I think some people think that's a bad thing. I think it's a beautiful thing of having been accepted into the society. And so in many ways, I feel free, but I feel at peace with my level of freedom. I'm sure many people of my generation would disagree with me, but
It is interesting to hear you talk about the privilege of having grown up in a time where being gay wasn't a big deal, because I often find myself saying the same thing, only to then remember or be reminded by someone else's experience that perhaps it was my unique situation and where I was geographically, because there are places where it's still horrific.
No, 100%. And I really am a privileged person. I'm cis, I'm white, grew up in Maryland, which is a liberal voting part of America. So for sure, this is not to say that the world is perfect. I think that I come from a unique position of privilege when it comes to the feeling of freedom.
Fashion is always inspired by culture, which we've obviously talked about a great deal today. And let's play a little game of your favorites. So what's your favorite film?
Babette's Feast.
Beautiful. Artist?
Willem de Kooning.
Ooh, good choice. Album?
That's hard. I love music. I feel like music is the thing that obsesses me. I think that the one I play the most, I have a record, then I play it on my record player, is this French band, Eliam Jacquinot, and they did the soundtrack to a movie called La Nuit de la Pleine Lune. So cute. It's just like your dream of summer pop music.
And book?
I love all the books by Murakami. I haven't read every single one, but I've read most of them. I love that kind of, it's very sober and magical at the same time.
And last but certainly not least, what is contemporary now?
Reducing your ego enough to be really honest in a loving way, looking at the world with love and honesty to really describe what you really see.
Gorgeous. Thank you, Nicholas. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you, Christopher.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of What's Contemporary Now. A special thanks to our producer, Sasha Grinblatt. Audio post-production by Chase Coughlin with original theme music by Joseph Topmiller and Chase Coughlin of The Black Soft. And visual design by Aaron Meager and Graham Prentice. Subscribe now to be the first to catch new episodes each week. And if you've enjoyed listening, we'd love to hear from you. Leave us a review and let us know your thoughts. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners like you. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn for additional content and join the conversation. Let us know what you think is contemporary now.